Hello and welcome to the Playmakers Corner podcast. I am one of your hosts, Cody Stoffer.
I'm your other co-host, Simon Villanos.
And I am Liam Hughes.
And here on episode 0, we are going to debut the Playmakers Corner podcast. This is recorded on August 29th, 2020. And this is a special episode because it's the debut of our new podcast, and it's going to be addressing some things that we want to address and recent events during this past week in sport and what that means for the youth. But first, we want to start off by discussing the legacy of actor Chadwick Boseman and the role model that he was. This was a pretty tough loss that happened just yesterday on August 28th. And I felt this one kind of hard because we've talked about this before when we recalled the cycle, and we're going to talk about it a lot more here on the Playmakers Corner. But representation is monumental, especially to the youth, and that's exactly what Chadwick was. He was an absolute inspiration and role model in the roles that he played, from Jackie Robinson to James Brown to Thurgood Marshall, and also the Marvel superhero Black Panther. And, I remember how big all of those movies were when they came out and how important they were to our society and communities. So definitely wanted to speak on that. What were some thoughts you guys had on Chadwick's legacy and, just how important he was?
Go ahead, Simon, if you want.
Sure. I'll start off. So Chadwick Boseman, honestly, he's an icon. I feel like he's a very low-key, icon in terms of like this last generation, right? And I think it's because like it all kind of just went by so quickly, because I don't know, like I'm trying to think of the first movie of his that I watched, and I'm pretty sure it's called The Express, aka the Ernie Davis story. So this movie's basically about the first African-American Heisman winner. And so Chadwick didn't play Ernie Davis. He played Floyd Little, the guy who was supposed to be like the next guy up over at Syracuse and whatnot. And so that's where I first saw him in. That's the first movie I saw him in back in 2008. Dang, that was 12 years ago. Like that, in general, that movie's actually pretty underrated. So I checked that out, and that was a very good, very well done movie. A ton of great stories there as well, because up until this movie, I didn't know that Jim Brown did not win the Heisman back in college because of racism, basically. So yeah, but Chadwick was a part of this story, and he was a part of many other ones, like 42, the Jackie Robinson story. That's an iconic movie for sure. Arguably one of the best depictions of Jackie Robinson, like in media in general, right? At least in my opinion. And I'm not even a baseball guy, so that's like, I don't know, I feel like that's like huge, right? Because it is kind of like one of those iconic baseball movies to me. Am I wrong there, or am I right?
No, you're right. You're completely right.
Big time.
Cool. Yeah. But yeah. And then obviously, he was in plenty of other movies, like that Thurgood Marshall movie. He played, oh wait, hold up. Wasn't there another movie outside of Black Panther that he was in as well? I'm like blanking out.
Get On Up, the James Brown story. And also, he was also in Draft Day, by the way.
Was in Draft Day. He played one of the prospects. Yeah. I think. I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
He did.
Yes, the linebacker.
Yeah. And so he was honestly all over the place. And I mean, if you look at some of the characters he played, he was playing iconic, African-American legends, honestly, people who have paved the way. And, for him to bring that to life in movies is huge, right? And so, and honestly, obviously there are other actors that have done that as well, but at least for, I would say our generation, because, he really got started in the mid 2000s, I would say, that kind of timeline, I guess, up until now. I feel like for our generation, he was huge, right? Like he depicted all of these big time, like legends from history, that have continued to pave the way for all people of color, and then obviously as well as the African African American community as well. And then, but Black Panther coming out, like I remember the hype around that, and there are definitely people like here. I'm not gonna let this go because there are definitely people saying like, oh well, Black Panther is gonna be overrated, and because it's just one of those race bait type of things is what the right wing media was basically saying, and it ended up being much better than that, but to a degree it also, exceeded expectations, and it didn't just stop with Black Panther. It continued on as well with, the end game. Well, gee, that's not a thing. The last two movies in the Marvel cinematic universe outside of the Spider-Man one, at least in the Phase 1 or Phase 2 era. So, him being just a big part of that and representing people of color in general. Yeah, so I can't even, and then so all those movies before Black Panther were a huge deal, right? But then Black Panther came around, and that was everything, and not even the movie. I'd say the character first because he was in Civil War.
Yes,
I think.
Yeah,
that was his first. Yeah, he was in Civil War, and then he was a big deal, in all of that, and it was a big deal at the time, obviously, because he was like the first person of color that got to play a superhero, basically, at least in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I would say. I can't really think of anybody else. I mean, I guess you could throw in Nick Fury, but he's not like a superhero, he's more of like a background character, just being honest. So there you go.
He got his own movie because like Falcon didn't have his own movie.
Yeah, that too.
And neither did Fury, or War Machine.
So it was a big deal, right? And he was featured, and I do remember, leading up to Black Panther, a lot of right-wing media people were saying that it would be, yes, only popular or good because it was race baiting, right? Like they're really going to play on the color card is what they were basically saying. And, it is as racist as it sounds because it did end up exceeding expectations, I would say, even that were set before. And, it was awesome and it was great on every, okay, maybe I wouldn't say every level. Some of those special effects were a little wonky, but that's not his fault. But like in general, the story was fantastic. The tech was great. Like the fight scenes were awesome. It was very versatile, and and he killed it. And everyone was looking forward to a Black Panther 2, 3, whatever. And then obviously he was in the Infinity series, which he played a huge role in, I would say, because that first, I guess, major battle in that series took place in Wakanda, right? Which he was the king of. Then the next one, a huge battle, like he was like one of the first ones out of the portal, if I'm remembering, and so that was crazy as well. And so, I guess I don't know, like all of that, like he became like a pop icon type. I mean, Black Panther was a pop icon, but like he kind of enhanced that by bringing it to life. And playing it so well as the king of Wakanda and whatnot. And, for a lot of people of color, that means the world to them, because that's representation that honestly, Hollywood has, I'm just going to be honest, sometimes failed to pick, in a while, at least superhero movies wise. Like, obviously, you have biopics and whatnot, like he was in before, but superhero movie wise, like, really can't think of another, like, major, like really good superhero movie, from the past decades that featured, a person of color like that, or that featured a predominantly whole cast of people of color like that, with him being like the ringleader of it all, like the star of the whole movie. And so that is something that, not only this generation, but future generations is gonna, appreciate for forever, honestly, because this is only the beginning of that. And I'm excited to see where the industry goes with that. But the industry is definitely losing one of its leaders and I guess biggest icons in Chadwick Boseman. So
I completely agree. Do you want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think I was the first person. Was I the first person to tell you, Cody?
Yeah, I found out from you.
Yeah, and the text that I sent Cody was, "Our king is dead."
Dang.
And that, I think that might just need to be all that I should say about it, or all that I really can say about it. He was the king. I loved him. I know that Cody loved him. He was like awesome, and he had this like gravitas about him, that I don't know. He was a special actor, a special guy, and he was doing a lot of important stuff, doing a lot of important, like historical representations of very important African American or African origin people in history. Like he was supposed to do Yasuke in 2021, which was in pre-production. I don't think that will be made, or maybe they'll find a new actor. But it was supposed to be the representation of the first and only known samurai of African origin. So just great stuff. I think the only movie I didn't like of his was Gods of Egypt, but that wasn't because of him. That was just because it's kind of a bad movie.
Yeah, it wasn't well made, but that's fine.
Yeah. So I don't know. I love the guy, and I miss him already. And I'm sad that he only got to do like basically less than 15 movies, around 10 movies of like, while he was, you know, really super popular and getting great roles and getting important roles. I think we're all gonna miss him.
And, yeah, that's crazy to think about.
He made his impact in every single role he played, though.
Yeah,
and
he really
I
did.
think that's what's important for, you know, us to know, and for you know, the generations that watched him and were inspired by him. You know, that impact will never go away, right? The first time that a Black Panther movie comes out, right, and you get inspired by it, or watching the Jackie Robinson story, or, you know, being reminded of commercially, you know, like being able to sell and distribute like commercial theater movies, right, that reach a wide audience for people to see and be inspired by, is what I'm trying to say. Is like he was able to fill theaters, right, on stories that were important for representation. So
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think y'all would agree in saying that, you know, he is one of the better actors and icons of our generation, at least, because I feel like, I mean, just reading, you know, through some of the stuff that he did and whatnot, like as his career was taking off, we were growing up with it, you know? And so I feel like adds extra onto it, because I feel like when it comes, at least this is my personal opinion as a person of color, when it comes to, you know, actors and, you know, directors and stuff like that, I feel like Chadwick Boseman, oh my gosh, I forgot his first name, but Kubler, you know, the director, he's a legend in himself, and Michael B. Jordan for sure are like some of the top guys, most iconic guys that have paved the way for, at least for our generation. And obviously, you know, we have the Samuel L. Jacksons of the world, and the Coach Herman Boone from Remember the Titans.
Denzel
What?
Washington.
Denzel Washington, yeah.
Denzel, I'm sorry, not Morgan Freeman.
Y'all
But,
are
Morgan
but also
Freeman too,
Morgan
though.
Freeman.
Yeah.
But also Morgan Freeman.
And so I feel like those actors, you know, the Denzels, Morgans, and, you know, Samuel L. Jacksons of the world, you know, those were the actors of the 90s, right? Or the representers of people of color, or actors in the 90s primarily, I would say. And then, you know, Michael B. Jordan and Chadwick Boseman are some of the more iconic, you know, people of color actors, POC actors of our generation, at least early 2000s, 2010s types, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know, like it hurts
And-
for sure, because it's like, you know, we did grow up with his career, and obviously, you know, we still have plenty of other up and coming, you know, great actors and whatnot from many different backgrounds. But, you know, Chadwick Boseman was definitely, you know, one of the first, you know, actors that I became a fan of in general. So there you go. Sorry, were you saying something, Liam? Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say, you know, can't leave out like Lupita Nyong'o and you know, the other. I'm blanking on names right now, which is dumb of me. But you know, other really important African
Yeah, I know who you're
Women.
talking about.
actresses.
Yeah, no, of course, and you can't. I mean, you can't forget about him. You know, they're part of this next generation of actors as well, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, I was just talking about Chadwick like, you know, and you know, I guess putting it in perspective from Chadwick Boseman's you know, impact on the game and whatnot, on the industry, I would say. So yeah. Oh, absolutely. You can't ever forget them. But he'll be missed, and he made an impact that went beyond entertainment. And it was something that a lot of people should have looked up to because he wasn't just an actor, right? Just like how athletes just aren't athletes, right? Like he did more for plenty of communities and opened up opportunities just by being in movies, right? And just by being amazing at what he's doing. Right, Cody?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a great transition, to kind of not move on, but not move on, because gone but not forgotten, Chadwick Boseman.
Always.
And we will always remember him. And as far as today and actions that we will continue to remember past this point in other realms, it were the protests and boycotts and sit-outs and postponement of games this past week across basically all Major League sports in America. Some more participative than others, but specifically it being kicked off by the Milwaukee Bucks boycott of Game 5 against the Orlando Magic. They never even took the court, specifically, and the rest of the league followed suit. The NBA canceled all of the games for Wednesday. The WNBA canceled their games for Wednesday, but not before taking the court in, in their form of protest, being writing the name Jacob Blake across their shirts with 7 bullet holes in their backs of their shirts. And some MLB games being canceled on Wednesday, with more being canceled on Thursday, and the NHL postponing all of their games Thursday as well as Friday. The NBA canceling their games Thursday and Friday as well. So lots of news on that front, and NBA players taking control of their platform as athletes and then asking more of their league, of their players association, of their coaches, and of their staffers to use their platform for a good cause. In response to the shooting of Jacob Blake within the past couple of weeks, and also in response to the domestic terrorism from Kyle, I don't even want to say his last name because he doesn't deserve to be recognized, but in response to, the lack of outrage from that, and to also fuel the fact that the cops who shot Jacob Blake 7 times are not fired or being processed fast enough. Just kind of wanted to get some of your guys' thoughts on this past week. I obviously, I was pretty moved by it and pretty inspired, and change actually came out of it in a couple of leagues. The leagues that we'd be expecting it to come from. But what were some of your guys' thoughts?
I think it was really necessary, and I'm not sure if they went far enough with it. I know that they want to play the game and they want to finish out the series and they want to finish out the playoffs, but at some point, I think almost everything needs to stop if this just continues, and it's going to continue. I think we need to draw attention to it. It's like, well, what does it matter if we have an NBA playoffs or an NBA championship if black men keep just getting murdered in the streets?
Well, I do want to say one thing. The NBA didn't return to play until the NBA and the NBA Players Association bonded and actually put in policy changes and expectations for every single team and players, and formed like a coalition for social justice. So they put action behind their time off. That's the
fair.
reason they're coming back. Whereas I don't see that same thing happening with the NHL, with the MLB, no way.
No.
And with the NFL, also definitely no way. But there were some still some very powerful demonstrations from those other sports too. One that was especially powerful to me was during the Mets Marlins game on Thursday. It was supposed to be Jackie Robinson Day. Actually, man, everything is just happening so close, right? It's supposed to be Jackie Robinson Day, which is normally in April, but they pushed back because of the pandemic. And they took the field for 42 seconds, and then they walked off, didn't play their game, and a Black Lives Matter shirt was left on home plate. I also thought that was a strong message, while also still being a good salutations to one of the most influential and important civil rights heroes in Jackie Robinson, fighting to break the color barrier in baseball, and which was then a domino for the color barrier to be broken in a ton of other places.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I did like what we saw. I would have liked to have seen more. And I understand why they've continued to, or they've decided to go forward with playing. And I don't hold it against them. It's just like I would have liked to see more. I want change now, and I know everybody else does. But it's like, I don't know. I'm personally of the mind that it's like, well, why can't we just stop everything until we get change? Until we get the change that we need.
That's fair. Here, feel free to fact check me on this. I tried looking up, when, if there's has been boycotts or something like this for professional sports leagues in the past, and how that affected social issues in general, if it did any. And I couldn't really find anything significant like this, right? And like I said, feel free to fact check me. I did try to look it up, but it's kind of it's a pretty broad, search too. So it's not exactly the easiest one as well. But I feel like I agree. I think the NBA could have done a little bit more for going back to play and whatnot. But I do think that this is a pretty big step, because something this magnitude hasn't even happened before. And we could talk about, the culture of owners in sports, and, culture of football, basketball, hockey, whatever, all you want, but, let's just be real, there is a reason why that something like this hasn't happened before. And, it is 2020, so it is kind of sad to see that this is one of the first times this has happened. But, this is a turning point in history when it comes to pro athletes and their influence on their communities, right? Because I think a lot of people have the misconception that because there are a high number of people of color in multiple sports leagues, that systematic racism doesn't exist, because obviously they were successful, right? But let's be real, to make it as a pro athlete, you could take out race in general, but just to make it as a pro athlete is tough, right? And add in, if you are a person of color or somebody with less privilege, then those opportunities are much, much harder to come by. And at that point, you're playing a game of chance rather than relying on your own hard work, right? And obviously, you always got to work hard, and that's going to be, the base of making it to the pro leagues. But, sometimes it does take a little bit of luck. So let's just keep that in mind. Being honest, I do believe that people of color don't get some of the same sporting opportunities as, other people. Just say that. And so that's an argument I've heard a lot. And I feel like a lot of people do expect that those athletes who go pro, just start pumping money back into their communities, which, some most definitely do. And it makes a difference. But for being honest, at the end of the day, you could put as much money as you want into a community. You could, do as many visits as you want into a community, but unless the government and the system changes, that money may not be put to as good of a use as you'd want, right? And so to cause that change, you got to vote, and you got to hit the polls, and you got to make sure you put people in there who do have the best interest of not just people of color in general, but of everyone in mind, no matter, I guess, privilege and race or whatever, right? But specifically, you got to have somebody in there that actually wants change for all people, and I am calling out, racist lawmakers and, politicians as well, because that's something that's existed for far too long, and their time it's going to be coming to an end pretty soon here, to be honest, or at least we're working towards that direction. So I really like the fact that, NBA players got their owners to basically accept and how should I say this? Yeah, basically accept the fact that, or compromise and accept the fact that, look, we're going to turn our NBA arenas into voting centers and whatnot for this election. And that's going to be huge because that's already 30 different voting centers that'll provide plenty of space for social distancing, and it's another voting center opened up because there are voting centers, or how should I say this? There are voting centers and policies around the nation that do, what's the word? Suppress voter rights. I think that's it, right? So
Yes.
Voter suppression, that's what it is. Yeah. And so, having that extra option, that means something to these communities. That means something to these communities with people of color specifically, and so that's a huge change. And, obviously pumping money into communities, that's always a good thing, especially if it's for a good cause. But, giving people who may not have had that opportunity to make a real change, and to vote people out and vote the right people in. For some people, that's a privilege that they haven't experienced yet in life. And so for NBA players to provide that, and to be, to have something come out of this boycott and not just, like boycott or, not play just for a little bit and then nothing really comes out of it except for awareness. I'm just going to be honest, awareness is great, but, at this point in time, we have a lot of awareness, in the world. At least I feel like there is a lot of awareness out there, and some people may choose to believe it. Some people may not choose to believe it, and so at the end of the day, it comes down to making the actual change. It comes down to November. It comes down to every single election for every office, no matter where you are, and it comes down to making sure that, despite being really good at, creating awareness with the NBA and, all these other sports leagues and all these protests throughout the last couple months, now it's time to go. Now it's time to make something happen, right? 'Cause these are all good, but unless change, like real change in specific offices happen, you could expect the same outcomes over and over again, but with different people. And that should be scary to people of color and to all people in general, because that just means, maybe the next victim is your kid. Maybe the next victim is your student. Maybe the next victim is your athlete. And so, that's a scary thing to think about, but you got to come to terms with that and be realistic with the situation at hand and know that, look, activism, money, awareness, that's all great. But, we got to force some type of change. And that starts with putting the right people in office.
Absolutely. And so my voice has been a little hoarse today because I was screaming and shouting at a protest yesterday, but there were some very powerful statements yesterday. And I think one of the most important ones was when you go to the voting poll, you're not only voting for yourself, right? You're voting for the next generation of children who can't vote right now. You're voting for immigrants that are denied voting. You're voting for people who have transitioned, and their ID has a different picture and a different name by what they go by. So transgender people are turned away. You are voting for older people who might not make it out during this pandemic, or their license is too old, so they are turned away. There are plenty of avenues for voter suppression, and that's why it is your moral responsibility when you go vote to not necessarily vote for the policies that favor you, right? That I feel like that's a lot of the problem that the Republican Party has is it's self-interest, okay? But when you go out and vote, it is your job as a human being to put in your vote that will better other human beings. And I thought that was very powerful and also very true. So, that's something to keep in mind as our listeners, if you're in high school or you might be turning 18 right before the election this year. And that's a very important lesson to know. And I think something that you could take away from these athletes is you are a human being first. Okay, we are all on this planet and we need to make it better for everybody, especially those that are oppressed, that are murdered, that are unable to make the change themselves. We have to vote for the people who've been put in prison, who no longer can vote or have past felonies and they've been silenced, right? There's a lot going on that keeps people from voting. And so you have to take your privilege or whatever amount of it you have, and you have to use that to empower others. And I think that's very important for our listeners to know that you're a human being first. And while you may be an athlete, even more, it's risky. It's going to be risky to use your platform, right, as an athlete to promote something. When the NBA boycott started, on that Wednesday, that was August 5th? August 26th.
Yeah.
4 years from that date was Colin Kaepernick's kneel that cost him his job. And he's still not in the league for it. So there's high risks, but it's the right thing to do because you are a person first and an athlete second.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I, as an athlete, especially a young athlete, I do get, how you might be afraid moving forward if you were to speak out and be one of those. And I'm slightly changing gears here, but I'm just saying, as a younger athlete, I do understand how you might feel some type of way about speaking out and being an athlete and whatnot, especially if your sport may be a little bit less progressive. Let's talk football. How about that? Because I think there's definitely a lot of fear there for sure. There's a reason the NFL is the way it is, right? And they don't respond in the way that the NBA obviously does. And, their stuff is more for show, right? Whatever Roger Goodell says right now about Kaepernick, you could discredit already. Because if he actually meant it, he would have done it 3 or 4 years ago. So there you go. And if he's the head guy, then you could only imagine what some of these older white owners are thinking about. And I'm just being candid right here, with my language and whatnot, because let's be honest, they are rich business owners. A lot of them have Southern roots, and, they are of that older age that went through the Jim Crow era as children or something like that as well. And so it is important to keep in mind who is in charge of that. But as an athlete, you do have a responsibility not only to yourself, especially if you're a person of color. Well, actually, no, just as a young athlete in general, but you have a responsibility to your community and all members of your community to stand up for them, because they are going to get silenced. I'm going to be honest, not everyone could be a pro athlete. Not everyone could be a spectacular athlete. That's just how it goes sometimes. But if you are in a position of power like that, being a great athlete, especially if you are out of high school and whatnot, being maybe a 4 or 5 star, 3-star athlete, any star athlete for that matter, you are in a position of power where, how should I say this? I'm not going to say, you're untouchable and whatnot. That's not what I'm saying. But, you do have a little bit more privilege having that natural talent, right? And having that platform, because you will have a platform. If you are a good athlete and you're going to go to college or high school or whatever, or you're in college or high school or whatever, you will have some sort of platform. Other people may not be, as exemplary or as spectacular at a sport or a hobby or, at whatever, their voices are a little bit more prone to be silenced because they can be, right? Because they're not on a stage like you are. So that's why this is important for young athletes to realize that, sure, you might lose interest or you might lose, something financially or whatever in the short term, right? But long term wise, this is for the better of all people. And if you are that dude or girl or whatever, you will get that opportunity if you're a real one, as long as you work at it, and find the right opportunities and whatnot. I do encourage those type of athletes, to look up to guys, not only like LeBron James and whatnot, but maybe to guys like Chuba Hubbard, who stood up for his teammates at Oklahoma State against Mike Gundy, who's somebody who, I'm just going to be honest, has a problematic past. And so I would say to look up to guys like Chuba Hubbard, who don't only speak out, but are very well educated and know exactly what they're talking about. Right? Because, guys like him know that, this movement isn't something that's going to end, or at least this movement is going to go on as long as, people keep it going on. Right? Once people start giving up and, getting complacent and whatnot, that's when the movement ends. It'll keep going as long as somebody's standing up and, people are using their platforms for good and standing up against injustice like this and systematic racism. Y'all agree? Like, what do y'all think about what I just said there? Was I out of pocket in pocket?
I don't think it's out of pocket because it's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know how I sit. I sit on the side of humanitarian rights and the progress of humanity as a society, culture, as a civilization. And we're just not moving in the right direction. So really, by any means necessary, I think is progress required and demanded.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially in a nation that claims to be the land of the free, home of opportunities. Because, that's been the label for a while, but to be honest, for a while, America's been the biggest hypocrite. So, honestly, I know there are people out there that compare our situation to others. And sure, I'll acknowledge, Americans have privilege for sure compared to other nations. But our nation to claim to be, I guess, golden standard of the world and, at least have that type of attitude, at least that's how other nations view America. And then to continue to act this way is extremely hypocritical. And they should be ashamed of themselves for holding up such a fake standard and such a fake, ideology, in my opinion.
No, you're right. How are you going to call it opportunity when... How are you going to call it the land of opportunity when people of color, specifically African Americans, are pulled over 5 times more often during the day? How are you going to call it the land of opportunity when African Americans are more likely to receive longer sentences and harsher sentences for the exact same crime that white people commit? How are you going to call it the land of opportunity when black people are arrested at a higher ratio and percentage according to their population than white people are? How are you going to call it opportunity when a lot of African Americans with, quote, black names or, quote, black hairstyles are against company policy and they're not hired to the same jobs? So, yeah, America's capping pretty hard, and they've been capping for a very long time. And, it's thank goodness for these athletes to call it to the forefront. And we continue to see, if you are African American in this country, you are more likely to die from police violence on a percentage level in accordance to population. So yeah, it's dangerous to be BIPOC in this country. And these athletes, specifically the NBA and WNBA, have both been absolute trailblazers this year in really raising their voice in accordance to social activism and social justice, and it's really important. And I hope that the youth and the next generation of humans and athletes are all taking notes and fight for the right things.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm not gonna lie, we might be expecting a little bit more out of, of this next generation, maybe not college, but high schoolers for sure. Cause I'm just thinking about myself back when I first voted, because, oh my gosh, it's been 4 years now because I'll be 22 on Wednesday. But years ago, I do remember, I was a senior in high school and I just turned 18 and I was voting my first election. It was Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. It was probably one of the worst ones. It is probably one of the worst ones in American history, to be honest. And before, I mean, I guess before that year, like I was definitely more under the impression of like, oh, well, I'm just a high schooler, right? Like this really doesn't like, apply to me. I'm just trying to play sports right now. And look, I get it. You know, you want to enjoy your sporting career as you should, right? But there is, and this is something that's going to come up multiple times on this podcast, but there's more to life than sports, or there's more to life than your sporting career. That, you know, when you leave that field or when your season ends, you got a whole life to live after that. And even if you're leaving that field and your season's still going on and whatnot, you still got to face life in your community and the standards that you are living in and that other people are living in. And so that's why it has to do with you. If you're a part of any team, you know, and I'm speaking mostly to high schoolers now, but if you are a part of any sporting team, you know, you're automatically a part of that community, if I'm being honest, because you represent that community. You have the colors and the logo of the nearest school in your community. So that should mean something to you. And it should mean something when the quality of life is lower for certain people, like not even everyone, but for certain people in your community. That should mean something to you, because that means that not everyone is getting treated right, obviously. And that means, you know, change needs to happen. And that means not only are you representing community that may follow those ideologies, but you're representing that community and not doing anything, even though you see it happening. Look, I'm not trying to come at you and, you know, be or have you be super defensive or anything like that. I'm just trying to state the facts here that, you know, as an athlete or any sport, you know, whoever you are, you represent your community automatically. And so that's why it should matter to you. Well, there you go. Did you have anything to add?
No, not really. I mean, you guys said it all pretty perfectly.
Cool.
All right.
I don't really have anything else to add on except for if you can vote, educate yourself, whether you're looking up prominent BIPOC in America or in history of the world. Well, you could go through the Chadwick Boseman collection of movies and learn a lot in his biopics about prominent Black figures in American history. You can go to blacklivesmatter.com and, you know, they have a list of resources as far as books, movies, and all documentaries that you can read or watch, and call out those who are being arrogant or I'm not going to call it arrogance, actually, who are being harmful to BIPOC and oppressed communities. So if your aunt says some dumb, hateful stuff, call them out, correct them, educate them as best as you can, and keep fighting this battle. That's what we need to do.
Yep. Don't be afraid to go make a change and, you know, shake up the norm in your community if that needs to be done. Just, you know, obviously approach it with, you know, with facts to back you up, you know, and make sure that, you know, you got, how should I say this? I don't want to just say the right intentions, but make sure, you know, what you're doing is going to help all people for sure, especially people who have been oppressed. So, yeah.
Does that do it for our thoughts on this past week in sports and news in general? And what it means to and like we said, people, we're going to be doing a lot of like focus on amateur sports, you know, but we're also focused on social justice because we're humans first, athletes / sport reporters and recruiters second. So
sure. And honestly, athletes, like, you know, you should want to be a better person. Like coaches are going to want people like, on the next level or whatever. They're going to want people who are educated and, you know, are more than just their sport. So there you go. All right, go on, Cody. Go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you for listening to episode 0. If you don't like it, well, this is what it's going to be. But in general, if you know any youth athletes at the high school level or at the amateur level whose film you'd like us to review, please go ahead and do that. We specifically know a lot more about football, basketball. We're also looking for MMA and any other type of experiences. We'd love to hear from young athletes, and we'd like to meet some playmakers. So you can find us on social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You can also find our podcast on YouTube, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and a bunch of other sources. So stay tuned, share us, and keep interacting and keep fighting the good fight.
It's good to be back. Good to be back.
And catch us with our next episode 1, on Friday.
Peace.